Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session as part of our course in educational psychology. In our last lesson, we built a strong foundation together. We explored what educational psychology actually means, why it matters in everyday classrooms, and how core learning theories shape the way students absorb information. We also talked about the importance of research and the role of reflection, not just for students but for teachers too. All of that brings us to today's topic, something just as practical and just as personal. Today, we are going to understand what reflective teaching really is. Not just in theory, but through examples. What it looks like when a teacher actively reflects on their own classroom methods, how it helps them grow, and why it can completely change the way students learn. We will walk through real life teaching scenarios, talk about how reflection improves decision making and how it supports students' emotional and academic growth. So, let's begin by understanding what is reflective teaching and how can it make us better educators, one small change at a time. Let me share a real simple example of reflective teaching, something every educator should practice, especially when working with psychology students. Mr. Steve is a lecturer teaching educational psychology to a group of second year university students. One week, his topic was Piaget's stages of cognitive development. He walked into class with a well prepared PowerPoint. He covered each stage in detail: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operation. He included all the textbook examples and definitions. He spoke clearly, followed the content, and wrapped up on time. But when he asked the students to explain each stage in their own words, most of them went quiet. After few tried to answer but struggled. Some looked confused and some just stared at the floor. Now, here is where reflection begins. That evening, Mr. Steve sat down and thought about what had happened. He asked himself, did I really help them understand, or did I just explain the theory? Did I involve them in the process? Were my examples too abstract? He realized he had focused too much on the content delivery and not enough on connection or engagement. So, instead of blaming the students or moving on, he decided to adjust. In the next class, he brought in short video clips of children doing everyday tasks like solving puzzles, role playing with toys, or discussing game rules. Then he asked the students in small groups to match the behaviors to Piaget's stages and explain why. That one change transformed the classroom. Students were more engaged. They talked, questioned, and debated. They were using theory in action. Even the shy ones joined the discussion. At the end of class, Mr. Steve asked the same question again, and this time the answers were clear, confident, and full of insight. That's reflective teaching. It's about being honest with yourself as a teacher, noticing when things don't land and making thoughtful changes to help students learn better. It does not require big tools, just small intentional shifts based on observation and care. And that habit over time makes a good teacher even better. Let me walk you through a real example and how educators can use reflective teaching to adjust and grow from it. So, led by real life experience. It's our third week into the course, and we are covering Piaget's stages of cognitive development. I had designed what I thought was a pretty interactive session: slides, a quick case study, and a group activity where students had to identify which Piaget stage focused on imaginary child by writing a short description. I was excited. I had used this exact lesson with another group before and it went really well. But halfway through this classroom, something felt off. The students were not as engaged. A few were whispering, one kept checking his phone, and another stared blankly at the board. I pushed through the lesson anyway. The activity wrapped up. Students turned in their answers and class ended. That night, I opened up my teaching journal and wrote honestly. 2 days, class didn't land. Same content, different energy. Why? I write down a few guesses. Maybe the examples did not connect with their everyday lives. Or maybe I assumed too much prior knowledge. The next step, I looked at the student survey I had shared at the start of the week. One of the optional questions was, what part of psychology do you find hardest to understand so far? Several students mentioned Piaget specifically. That gave me a big clue. That were not designated because they were bored. They were confused. So I took it further. I scheduled a quick peer observation with a colleague from the psychology department. She sat in quietly for 20 minutes during my next class, which was on Vygotsky. Afterwards, over coffee, she said, "You had got great energy, but you are rushing the theory. You jumped into application before checking if they understand the basics." That hit me. She was right. I decided to review the video recording of that Piaget class. Watching it back was uncomfortable. I could see myself skimming over key concepts, asking questions that only one or two students answered, and moving too quickly between tasks. At one point, I said, "You all get this right," and kept going without waiting for a response. That was a hard pill to swallow, but incredibly necessary. With all that feedback from my journal, my students, my peer, and the recording, I redesigned the Piaget lesson. This time, I broke it into two parts. In the first class, we only focused on understanding the four stages clearly, using examples from local schools and cartoons they grew up watching. I even asked them to bring pictures of themselves as toddlers and explain how their behavior at that age related to Piaget stages. Then, in the second class, we applied the theory through more structured group tasks, but with checkpoints for understanding built in. The change in the room was immediate. Students were laughing, comparing stories, asking questions. One of them came up after class and said, "I finally get it now. I used to think this theory was just abstract, but I can actually see it in real life." That moment, that's what reflective teaching does. It turns a moment of failure into friction, into growth. And just to close the loop, I revisited my teaching journal that night and wrote, same theory, same students, different strategy, and this time it worked. I also brought it up in my next mentorship meeting with my senior faculty advisor. He suggested I write a short reflection report and present it in our monthly faculty development session so others could learn from it. That was another level of reflection, sharing it with others. So, that one difficult class, it became a turning point in my teaching. Not because it went wrong, but because it took the time to step back, reflect, gather feedback, and try again. That's reflective teaching in action, messy, honest, and real. And I had say it's one of the most powerful tools we have as educators. Thank you for joining me in today's introduction to educational psychology. We have just taken our first step into a field that quietly shapes everything from how we teach to how students grow. We looked at what educational psychology is, why it truly matters beyond textbook, and how key learning theories connect to what actually happens in classrooms. We also touched on how important reflection and research are, not just for scholars but for real life teachers trying to do their best every day. As we move forward in this course, we will go deeper into how students learn. We will explore major learning theories, motivation techniques, effective classroom management, student assessment, and how to design inclusive learning for all. I encourage you to reflect on your own learning experiences and begin thinking like an educator, one who sees the whole student, not just test scores or behavior, but their mind, heart, and growth as a human being. Until next time, stay thoughtful and stay engaged. Assalamu alaikum and Allah Hafiz.